Reading changed the way I think about music, about success, about health and fitness, and about life. It is the one habit I neglected for most of my life, and the one habit that changed it completely. So, in this video, I want to share why I started reading, why it changed the way I think, and why it might change your life too. Hey everyone, Mark here. Welcome back to another episode of Mindset of a Musician. Today we're talking about reading, and honestly, that is something I struggled with for most of my life. Because before turning 30, I'd only read a handful of books, and many of them I never even finished. So looking back, I had no idea how much reading would eventually change my thinking, my creativity, my discipline, my perspective, and even the way I live my life. So, before we dive in, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these videos. So, now let's start with why I think most people stop reading. I can only speak from my own experience and what I've come to understand over the last few years. In school, I mostly read books that didn't interest me at all, and there was no teacher who sparked the joy of reading in me. Sting once wrote in his autobiography that his environment growing up in Newcastle inspired his love for books. And I think that matters a lot. Because if nobody around you inspires you to read during childhood, I think it can be very hard to discover that love on your own. At least that was true for me. But later in my teenage years, I became obsessed with music. Playing guitar, listening to music, writing songs, that was my whole world. And reading just wasn't part of it. Over the years, I read a few thrillers and biographies, but I also left a lot of books unfinished on my shelf. And looking back, I think I was simply too exhausted to focus on reading. Because I always read shortly before going to bed, when my mind and my eyes were already tired. So I think a lot of people fail to build a reading habit because they read at the wrong time of day. Another huge reason is, of course, social media. Reading requires patience, focus, and concentration. It doesn't give you dopamine hits every few seconds. So if your brain is used to constant stimulation, reading can feel painfully boring at first. And because we train ourselves to constantly scroll, our attention span gets weaker and weaker over time. But reading requires sustained attention. Otherwise, we lose the thread after a few pages. So the last reason that really applied to me was identity. And I made a whole video about how important identities are. I'll link it up here. So once I finished my first few books, I started to see myself differently. And suddenly, reading became easier and easier, and I started to see myself as a reader. In the last chapter, we'll talk about how to actually build a reading habit. But first, let's talk about how reading changed the way I think. So first of all, I think it really matters what you read. As I've already said, in my teenage years, I mostly read thrillers and a few biographies. And they were entertaining, but especially the thrillers didn't really change the way I think. I wasn't reading about psychology, philosophy, health, finances, or personal development. And honestly, I used to think personal development books were kind of cheesy, like those change your life in 7 days type of books. But the truth is, some of these books truly changed the trajectory of my life. And of course, many of them repeat similar ideas in different ways. But reading alone changes nothing. You actually have to live what you read. And if you don't apply those principles to your life, nothing happens. Through Ryan Holiday and the Daily Stoic, I discovered philosophy, and especially the philosophy of the Stoics. And that had a massive impact on the way I think and act. I started reflecting more deeply on my values, on my habits, and the kind of person I want to become. Reading about finances was probably one of the hardest topics for me at first, but also one of the most important because, especially as a self-employed musician, money is really important. And the truth is, nobody really teaches you about money investing and financial freedom unless you actively seek that knowledge yourself. And I wish I had learned some of these lessons in my teens, but better late than never. Another huge area was health and fitness. Books like Outlive, Why We Sleep, Breath, Food War, and Eat and Sleep Smarter changed the way I think about sleep, nutrition, recovery, and training. They helped me understand my body better instead of blindly relying on average advice. And honestly, the knowledge I gained from books has been priceless. I maybe spent a few €100 on books, but learning the same lessons through seminars or coachings would have cost me thousands. So now let's talk about why reading is especially important for musicians and artists. Biographies are still one of the most important books for me. Reading about musicians, bands, artists, athletes, and other successful people helps me understand where success really comes from. And not just the achievements, but also the failures, the sacrifices, the doubts, and the struggles behind them. And I think it's especially important for us musicians because we constantly compare ourselves to others and usually only see the highlight reel, the sold out tours, the streams, and the viral videos, and not the years of uncertainty behind them. Biographies help to humanize success. They remind us that most people who made it had to struggle for a very, very long time. As musicians today, we also have to manage much more than just making music. There's content creation, marketing, branding, booking, networking. So learning about the music business matters too. How to Make It in the New Music Business by Ari Herstead was a great resource for me. When it comes to songwriting, both fiction and nonfiction can be incredibly inspiring. Novels can spark ideas, emotions, imagery, and stories that might later find their way into your songs. And nonfiction books about songwriting can help you better understand structure, lyrics, melody, rhymes, and the creative process. So for me, Writing Better Lyrics by Pat Pattison was a great place to start. But honestly, the most valuable thing reading gave me wasn't inspiration, it was focus. Because reading trains your attention span. It teaches you to slow down, to stay present, and to concentrate deeply on one thing. I made a whole video about deep work and focus. I'll link it up here. So, in a world full of distraction, I truly believe that reading is one of the biggest tools we have that helps us become more creative, more thoughtful, and more focused. So for me, timing, duration, and consistency were the key things that helped me build a reading habit. So after reading The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, I started building a morning routine. And part of that routine was reading for 10 minutes every single morning. Not more and not less. And I usually worked out before reading so that my mind was awake and focused. And over time, reading became part of my identity and my daily life. So if you struggle to stay consistent with reading, here are a few things that really helped me. So pick 10 minutes in your day where you can read without distractions, with a clear mind and full attention. Don't start with an hour. Keep it short. And remember, the goal in the beginning is consistency. And personally, I wouldn't recommend reading before going to bed when your energy levels are already low. So don't force yourself to read books that completely bore you. Please don't do that. Read biographies, philosophy, psychology, music books, whatever truly sparks your curiosity, because interest creates momentum. This one changed a lot for me, and I got this from Ryan Holiday and from Cal Newport because both of them talk about always carrying a book with them. So instead of automatically reaching for your phone, you start reading a few pages here and there. Waiting at the doctor, sitting on a train, or standing somewhere alone. Those small moments add up quickly. And don't worry about reading huge amounts. Even a few pages matter. And I love paperback books because they help me spend less time on screens. So lastly, I highly encourage you to highlight, mark, and scribble in your books. I underline ideas, I mark important passages, and yeah, I write down my thoughts in a dedicated book journal. So that completely changed the way I read because it made me an active reader instead of just passively consuming information. So I hope this video can help you start reading again or gave you some concepts to elevate your reading. If you want more book recommendations or dive deeper into topics like that, you can join me in my Mindset Monday newsletter. Link is in the description. Please also let me know what's your favorite book and why. Thanks so much for watching and see you in the next one.